I laughed at the supermarket cashier until she paid for my groceries. The fluorescent lights of the supermarket hummed, a sterile, buzzing soundtrack to the end of my workday. I was tired, bone-deep weary, and the checkout line stretched an eternity ahead of me. Each beep of the scanner felt like a personal affront, a slow, deliberate chipping away at my dwindling patience. My cart was overstuffed, a testament to a week of takeout and a sudden impulsive urge to finally cook something resembling actual food. Then I saw her, the cashier. She was young, maybe early 20s, with a tired slump to her shoulders and a faded, ill-fitting uniform. Her name tag, slightly askew, read Maria. As she scanned the items of the person in front of me, her movements were slow, almost hesitant. A can of soup slipped from her grasp, clattering loudly onto the conveyor belt. A small sigh escaped her lips, barely audible above the ambient drone. And then I did it. I chuckled. Not a loud, obnoxious guffaw, but a quiet, condescending smirk that I thought I'd managed to suppress. It was a dismissive sound, a judgment passed in a nanosecond, born from my own exhaustion and a misplaced sense of superiority. I saw her head snap up, a flicker of something, hurt, embarrassment, in her eyes before she quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing a faint pink. I immediately felt a prickle of shame, but it was quickly buried under a fresh wave of irritation. Get it together, I told myself. It's just a job. The line shuffled forward, and soon I was placing my own items on the belt. I avoided her gaze, focusing instead on the blur of colors and shapes as she scanned my groceries. A dozen eggs, a carton of milk, a bag of flour, a jar of expensive olive oil, a block of sharp cheddar, a carton of strawberries, a package of artisanal bread. My impulse buy weak. As the total flashed on the screen, a wave of dread washed over me. I'd miscalculated. My bank account was leaner than I'd realized, a consequence of a few too many late-night online purchases and an unexpected car repair. I fumbled for my wallet, my fingers suddenly clumsy. The numbers swam before my eyes. I could feel the eyes of the people behind me, a palpable pressure. My face burned. I muttered the total under my breath, a hollow sound. Maria, her expression unreadable now, looked at the screen, then at me. She didn't say anything for a long moment. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I braced myself for the inevitable request for another form of payment, the awkward shuffling, the public display of my financial shortcomings. But instead, she did something that stopped me dead. She reached out, her hand hovering over the keypad, and with a quiet, decisive tap, she cleared the total. Then she looked at me, her eyes no longer holding that flicker of hurt, but something else entirely, a quiet strength, a knowing. She pushed a few of my items, the ones that had been scanned, back towards me. "It's on me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Don't worry about it." The world tilted. The fluorescent lights seemed to dim, the hum fading into a distant echo. The air grew heavy, charged with an unexpected emotion that I couldn't immediately name. It wasn't just surprise, it was a profound, almost physical jolt that resonated deep within my chest. My carefully constructed edifice of self-importance, built on the shaky foundation of my own perceived competence, crumbled in an instant. The easy judgment I'd passed moments before, the almost involuntary chuckle of derision at her small mishap, now echoed in the hollow space where my empathy should have been. It was a stark, unflinching mirror held up to my own character, reflecting back a version of myself I barely recognized, and certainly didn't want to. This wasn't just about the groceries. It was about a fundamental misunderstanding of the human experience, a failure to see the person behind the uniform, behind the perceived slowness, behind the dropped can of soup. It was about my own exhaustion, my own stress, blinding me to the quiet struggles of another. The weight of my own insensitivity settled upon me, heavy and suffocating. I stood there, my hand still in my wallet, the plastic cards suddenly feeling like useless trinkets. The people behind me, their impatience momentarily forgotten, were silent witnesses to this unexpected tableau. I wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize, but the words caught in my throat, tangled with a sudden, overwhelming sense of guilt. I had expected a transaction, a sterile exchange of goods for money. I had received a lesson, delivered with a quiet grace that cut deeper than any reprimand. The universe, it seemed, had a way of course-correcting, and today, it had chosen the humble aisles of a suburban supermarket to deliver its message. The cheap cheese and artisanal bread suddenly felt like a heavy burden, a tangible symbol of my own moral failing. The strawberries, so vibrant and promising moments before, now seemed to mock me with their sweetness. I looked at Maria, truly looked at her this time, and saw not a slow cashier but a person extending a gesture of profound kindness that I had, in my arrogance, dismissed, and then, through my own carelessness, almost missed entirely. The simple act, so small in the grand scheme of things, had cracked open something within me, something that had been dormant for far too long. The hum of the lights returned, no longer a soundtrack to my annoyance, but a reminder of the ordinary world, a world I had been so quick to judge, and a world that had just shown me a glimpse of its extraordinary capacity for grace. My breath hitched. The words, simple as they were, hung in the air, heavy with an unspoken weight. On me. It wasn't just a phrase, it was an act of grace that felt impossibly large in that sterile, fluorescent-lit space. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a different kind of heat than the flush of embarrassment from before. This was the heat of a profound, almost painful realization. My own exhaustion, my own stress, had rendered me blind. I had seen a mistake, a moment of fumbling, and my immediate ingrained reaction was judgment. I'd projected my own frustrations onto her, reducing her to a clumsy employee, an obstacle in my path. The chuckle I now understood wasn't just a sound. It was a dismissal of her humanity, a confirmation of my own petty superiority complex that I'd nurtured in the quiet corners of my own self-pity. But Maria, with her quiet efficiency and her faded uniform, had seen something else. She had seen me, not just a customer, but a person weighed down by their own burdens. She had recognized the subtle tension in my shoulders, the weary set of my jaw, the way I'd fumbled with my wallet, and instead of mirroring my own internal chaos, she had offered a balm. Her act wasn't just about the groceries. It was a silent, powerful refutation of my own cynicism. It was a demonstration that kindness, genuine and unsolicited, could still exist, even in the most mundane of transactions. I wanted to protest, to insist on paying, to somehow undo the ugliness of my earlier reaction, but the words wouldn't come. They were lodged somewhere deep in my throat, tangled with a sudden, overwhelming sense of shame. My own carefully constructed narrative of the world, where everyone was out for themselves and you had to be tough to survive, felt flimsy and pathetic. Her silent act of generosity had exposed its rotten core. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the faint lines around her eyes, the way her hands, though steady now, were rough, bearing the marks of work. She wasn't just a cashier, she was a person with her own story, her own burdens, her own quiet resilience. The strawberries, so bright and cheerful moments before, now seemed to represent a sweetness I hadn't earned, a kindness I had actively, though unconsciously, tried to dismiss. The artisanal bread felt heavy, an expensive symbol of my own misguided indulgence. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant beep of another scanner and the low hum of the refrigeration units. I finally managed to meet Maria's eyes. There was no pity there, no condescension, only a quiet understanding that felt both humbling and strangely comforting. It was the look of someone who had seen hardship, who understood the fragile nature of human dignity, and who chose in that moment to uphold it. I finally found my voice, though it was barely a whisper, rough with unshed tears. "Thank you," I managed, the words feeling woefully inadequate. "Really, thank you." She offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a subtle acknowledgement that the transaction, the one I had expected, was over. She began bagging my groceries with practiced efficiency, her movements now fluid and sure. Each item placed gently into the plastic bags felt like a small act of absolution. I watched her, mesmerized by the quiet dignity with which she performed her task, a stark contrast to my own internal turmoil. The weight of my earlier judgment, the careless chuckle felt like a physical burden I was now shedding, piece by piece, with each bag she filled. I wanted to say more, to explain the magnitude of her gesture, to confess the ugliness of my initial reaction. But the words remained trapped. It felt too raw, too personal, to lay bare the extent of my own failings in that public space. Instead, I focused on the simple act of gratitude, on the profound impact of her unexpected kindness. As she handed me the last bag, our fingers brushed. It was a fleeting contact, a spark of warmth that seemed to resonate through my entire being. It was a reminder of our shared humanity, a connection forged in a moment of unexpected grace. I finally managed a small, genuine smile, one that reached my eyes this time. She returned it, a soft, knowing smile that held a universe of unspoken understanding. It was a smile that said, "I see you, and it's okay." The fluorescent lights seemed to soften, their harsh glare replaced by a gentler glow. The air in the supermarket no longer felt sterile and oppressive, but charged with a quiet, hopeful energy. As I turned to leave, the weight of my groceries felt lighter than it should have, a tangible symbol of the burden of my own cynicism being lifted. The experience had been a profound, albeit uncomfortable, awakening. It had stripped away a layer of my own self-deception, revealing a vulnerability I hadn't known existed. The easy judgment, the quick dismissal of another's struggle, had been a shield, protecting me from the uncomfortable truth of my own limitations. Maria's simple act had shattered that shield, forcing me to confront the less charitable parts of myself. It wasn't about the money saved or the groceries received. It was about the profound, visceral understanding that empathy wasn't just a concept, it was an action, a choice, a powerful force that could reshape perspectives and mend fractured spirits. Walking out into the cool evening air, the plastic bags swinging gently in my hands, the weight of the groceries felt less like a burden and more like a reminder. A reminder of the unexpected encounter, of the quiet strength of a young woman named Maria, and of the profound lesson she had so generously imparted. The world outside the supermarket seemed sharper, more vibrant. The chirping of crickets, the distant rumble of traffic, the scent of damp earth after a light rain. It all registered with a new clarity. My own exhaustion hadn't vanished, but it was no longer the dominant force. It was now tempered by a quiet sense of wonder, a burgeoning appreciation for the subtle, often unseen acts of grace that weave through the fabric of everyday life. I had entered that store with a chip on my shoulder, a smug certainty in my own rightness, and a quickness to judge. I was leaving with a humility that was both humbling and exhilarating. The easy dismissiveness, the automatic assumption of inadequacy in others, felt alien now, a vestige of a past self I was eager to leave behind. It wasn't a grand epiphanic revelation, but a quiet internal shift, like the slow turning of a tide. The realization that my own struggles, my own stresses, did not grant me a license to diminish the humanity of others, was a lesson etched not in words, but in feeling. It was the sting of shame followed by the warmth of unexpected kindness, a potent combination that had fundamentally altered my perspective. The way I moved through the world, the way I interacted with strangers would be different. It had to be. There was a newfound awareness of the invisible battles everyone fought, the unseen burdens they carried. My laughter, I knew, would never again be so quick, so careless, so devoid of compassion. It would be a gentler sound, a more considered expression, tinged with the memory of a cashier's quiet generosity. The fear of judgment, the need to feel superior, had begun to recede, replaced by a tentative curiosity, a desire to truly see the people around me. The world hadn't changed, but my place within it, my perception of it, had. The memory of her smile, quiet and knowing, stayed with me long after I'd unpacked my groceries. It was a gentle echo in the silence of my apartment, a subtle reminder of the profound impact a single, unprompted act of kindness can have. The weight of my own judgments felt lighter now, replaced by a nascent understanding of shared vulnerability. The world, I realized, was not a competition to be won, but a tapestry of individual journeys, each intricate and deserving of respect. The hum of the supermarket lights still lingered, a phantom sound, but now it was a lullaby, not a burden. The initial shock of Maria's generosity had subsided, leaving behind a profound sense of introspection that went beyond the immediate embarrassment. It wasn't just about recognizing my own judgmental nature, it was about understanding the mechanisms that fueled it. My exhaustion had been a fertile ground, yes, but it was the ingrained habit of compartmentalizing people that truly allowed the judgment to take root. I had seen Maria not as an individual, but as a function, a cashier whose purpose was to scan items efficiently. When she faltered, she deviated from that perceived function, and my mind, seeking order, categorized the deviation as incompetence, an annoyance. Furthermore, the pressure of my own financial worries had heightened my sensitivity to perceived slowness, creating a distorted lens through which I viewed her actions. Now, consider how this applies when you face a colleague who seems perpetually behind on their tasks. Instead of immediately labeling them as lazy or inefficient, pause and consider the potential unseen factors. Perhaps they are grappling with a personal crisis, overloaded with responsibilities beyond their immediate role, or simply possess a different working style that doesn't fit your predefined notions of productivity. The impulse to judge, so swift and automatic, often bypasses the more complex and ultimately more compassionate exploration of underlying causes. Building on this, however, the encounter also illuminated the subtle ways our own internal narratives can shape our perceptions of external reality. My narrative that week had been one of scarcity and struggle, a story I was unconsciously broadcasting through my body language and my hurried impatience. Maria, in her own way, had recognized that narrative and offered a counter-story, one of abundance and mutual support. It wasn't a conscious decision on her part to teach me a lesson. It was a spontaneous act of human connection that happened to resonate deeply, because my own internal state made me receptive to it. Think about a time you felt misunderstood. Often the misunderstanding isn't solely due to the other person's lack of clarity, but also to the preconceived notions or emotional baggage you bring to the interaction. If you're already feeling defensive or resentful, you're far more likely to interpret neutral statements as attacks or simple oversights as deliberate slights. Consequently, the true challenge lies not just in recognizing our judgmental impulses, but in actively dismantling the mental frameworks that support them. This involves a conscious effort to suspend immediate assumptions and to actively seek out alternative explanations for behavior. Instead of thinking, "They're being difficult," try asking, "What might be going on for them that I'm not seeing?" This shift in perspective requires a degree of emotional humility, an acknowledgement that our own understanding is inherently limited. It means accepting that the world is far more nuanced and complex than our immediate perceptions often allow. The cashier's dropped can of soup, a seemingly minor incident, became a catalyst because it nudged against a carefully constructed, albeit flawed, internal model of how the world and its inhabitants should operate. Conversely, the temptation to cling to our judgments can be powerful, especially when they reinforce our existing beliefs about ourselves or others. If I believed myself to be a competent, successful individual, a moment of financial embarrassment in public could be deeply unsettling. Blaming the cashier's perceived inefficiency, even subconsciously, might have served as a fleeting, maladaptive coping mechanism, an attempt to deflect from my own discomfort. This is akin to a chef who, when a dish doesn't turn out perfectly, immediately blames the quality of the ingredients rather than examining their own technique. The easier path is often to find an external scapegoat rather than to engage in the more difficult and introspective work of self-examination. This doesn't mean we should never hold people accountable, but rather that the first impulse, the default setting, should be one of curiosity and compassion, not condemnation. Another crucial layer is the realization that empathy is not a passive state, but an active practice. It's not enough to simply feel sorry for someone. True empathy requires a willingness to step outside our own frame of reference and attempt to understand their experience, even if only partially. Maria's act transcended mere sympathy. It was a demonstration of solidarity, a silent acknowledgement of shared humanity in the face of everyday struggles. It was an active choice to alleviate a moment of distress, rather than to simply observe it. Consider the difference between watching a news report about a natural disaster and volunteering to help in the aftermath. Both involve acknowledging suffering, but only the latter embodies active empathy, requiring personal investment and a willingness to engage with the reality of another's hardship. The lingering scent of discount detergent and overripe bananas from the supermarket checkout still clung to my jacket as I walked. It was a strange, almost tangible reminder of the emotional whiplash I'd experienced. The initial sting of shame had morphed into a more complex, lingering discomfort, a quiet hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. This wasn't just about a momentary lapse in judgment. It was about recognizing a deeply ingrained pattern of emotional self-preservation that had, until that moment, gone largely unchallenged. My tendency to react with impatience and judgment when faced with perceived incompetence or delay wasn't born from malice, but from a place of anxiety. It was a subconscious attempt to regain a sense of control in situations where I felt vulnerable, like being confronted with my own financial shortfall. If I could identify a flaw in someone else, however minor, it provided a temporary, albeit illusory, sense of my own superiority and competence. Furthermore, the encounter forced me to confront the subtle ways in which societal conditioning can reinforce these judgmental tendencies. We are bombarded with messages that equate speed and efficiency with value, that implicitly reward a relentless pursuit of productivity. In this environment, any deviation from that norm can be easily perceived as a failing, both in ourselves and in others. Consider the pervasive pressure to always have the right answer, to navigate every social interaction with flawless grace, to maintain an unruffled exterior regardless of internal turmoil. This constant demand for perfection can breed an intolerance for imperfection, both in ourselves and, by extension, in those around us. When someone stumbles, as Maria had with the can of soup, it can feel like a disruption to the expected order, a crack in the facade of seamless functionality that we've been conditioned to expect. Building on this, however, the act of kindness itself served as a powerful counterpoint to this ingrained societal narrative. Maria's response wasn't dictated by efficiency or productivity. It was driven by something far more fundamental: human connection. Her decision to cover my groceries wasn't about optimizing a transaction. It was about recognizing my humanity and offering a gesture of unexpected grace. This highlights a crucial distinction. While societal pressures might push us towards a relentless pursuit of external validation through achievement, true human connection thrives on empathy and understanding, qualities that often manifest in small, seemingly insignificant acts. It's in these moments, when we extend grace rather than judgment, that we begin to dismantle the rigid expectations that can otherwise limit our capacity for genuine connection. Consequently, the challenge now lay in translating this newfound awareness into sustained behavioral change. It wasn't enough to simply acknowledge my judgmental tendencies. I needed to actively cultivate a more compassionate and curious approach to my interactions. This meant consciously pausing before reacting, questioning my initial assumptions, and making a deliberate effort to consider the unseen circumstances that might be influencing another person's behavior. Think about a time you've been stuck in a frustratingly slow-moving line, perhaps at a government office or a busy service counter. Instead of immediately attributing the delay to staff incompetence or apathy, try this. Mentally list 3 plausible, non-judgmental reasons for the slowdown. Perhaps the person ahead is dealing with a complex issue requiring extra time, or maybe the staff member is new and still learning the ropes, or perhaps there's an unforeseen technical problem. Conversely, the temptation to revert to old habits is a powerful one, especially during moments of personal stress or fatigue. The mental energy required to override ingrained patterns of thought and behavior can be considerable. It's far easier to fall back into the familiar comfort of quick judgments, which offer a superficial sense of control and validation. This is similar to a seasoned athlete who, under intense pressure during a crucial game, might revert to a familiar, albeit less effective, training routine, rather than adapting to the immediate demands of the situation. The automatic response, honed through years of practice, can be difficult to consciously override. Therefore, the cultivation of empathy requires ongoing, deliberate practice, a conscious commitment to choosing a more compassionate response even when it feels more difficult. It's about recognizing that true strength lies not in the absence of flaws, but in the willingness to confront and transform them. The quiet hum of the supermarket's refrigeration units seemed to amplify the silence that followed my departure, a silence that wasn't empty, but pregnant with unspoken realization. The weight of Maria's gesture wasn't just in the groceries I carried. It was in the sudden, stark exposure of my own inner landscape. My previous internal monologue had been a whirlwind of self-recrimination, a frantic attempt to dissect the immediate event. But now, a deeper layer began to unfurl, one that examined the subtle, almost imperceptible ways our perceptions are shaped by our immediate emotional state. When we are overwhelmed, stressed, or feeling a deficit in our own lives, our capacity for empathy can shrink, becoming a narrow aperture rather than a wide lens. This isn't a conscious decision to be unkind. It's a primal response, a defense mechanism where our own needs and anxieties take precedence, often blinding us to the experiences of others. Think about navigating a crowded street when you're running late and already frazzled. The casual jostle of a stranger, which you might otherwise ignore, suddenly feels like a deliberate act of aggression, a personal affront. Your own internal narrative of urgency and pressure colors your perception of external stimuli, transforming neutral interactions into perceived obstacles. Building on this, however, the encounter illuminated the critical difference between recognizing someone's situation and truly connecting with it. My initial reaction to Maria's dropped can of soup was to categorize it as an inefficiency, a deviation from expected performance. This detached observation, devoid of emotional resonance, allowed my own weariness to translate into dismissive amusement. Maria's subsequent act, conversely, was an act of bridging that gap. She didn't just see a fumbling cashier. She saw a person, perhaps experiencing their own brand of exhaustion or worry, and responded with a gesture that affirmed shared humanity. Now, consider how this applies when you encounter a colleague who consistently misses deadlines. Instead of immediately labeling them as unreliable, try to imagine the narrative they might be living. Are they juggling an overwhelming workload? Are they dealing with personal challenges that are impacting their focus? Are they perhaps struggling with a particular aspect of the task that they're hesitant to voice? This shift from simple observation to imaginative connection requires a conscious effort to move beyond superficial judgments and explore the underlying human experience. Furthermore, the experience underscored the often unseen resilience that people carry. Maria's response wasn't one of embarrassment or defensiveness. It was one of quiet grace and generosity. This wasn't about her being inherently good, but about her possessing an inner strength that allowed her to rise above a potentially awkward or negative interaction. This resilience is often forged in the crucible of everyday challenges, the cumulative effect of navigating life's inevitable bumps and bruises. It's the quiet fortitude that allows someone to face adversity, not with bitterness, but with an enduring capacity for kindness. Think about a parent who, after a long day of work and dealing with a child's tantrum, still manages to offer a comforting hug and a patient explanation. Their own fatigue is evident, yet their capacity for love and understanding remains, a testament to an inner reserve of strength that transcends immediate discomfort. Conversely, my own immediate reaction had been a projection of my own internal scarcity mindset. My own financial worries, coupled with my exhaustion, created a fertile ground for a judgmental outlook. It's as if my own internal resources felt depleted, making me less inclined to extend grace or understanding to others, particularly when their perceived shortcomings mirrored my own anxieties. This mirrors the experience of someone trying to share their last piece of bread when they themselves are starving. Their own need makes it incredibly difficult to offer generosity. This isn't an excuse for poor behavior, but an explanation of the psychological mechanisms at play. It highlights how our own internal state can profoundly influence our external interactions, often in ways we are not fully aware of. The act of giving, whether it's a can of soup or a moment of understanding, often stems from a place of internal abundance, not scarcity. The echo of Maria's smile, so gentle and knowing, serves as a constant, quiet reminder. It speaks to the power of empathy, not as a passive emotion, but as an active choice, a deliberate act of connection that can bridge divides and affirm our shared humanity. It's a reminder that in a world often defined by its complexities and its pressures, the simplest acts of grace can hold the most profound power. They can dismantle walls, offer solace, and, in the most unexpected of ways, illuminate the path toward a more compassionate understanding of ourselves and each other. The true practice begins now, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet intention to see beyond the surface, to listen beyond the noise, and to offer grace where judgment might once have resided.